I'm grateful that we're actually doing the Torah portions because if you want to grow in your faith, then I think the Torah portions are very important. I'll never forget when I first was able to finally live my faith out. I started doing Torah portions, and it was my father and I, because he came to live with me. He had all kinds of problems with his heart and with his hip, and he came to live with me, and I'm so grateful that for that time that I got to spend with my father, because I had lost many years with him. There was all kinds of problems in our families, mainly because of my first spouse, who was against keeping Torah and all that stuff, and she didn't want any part of it, and it caused my father and I to have this divide, and I didn't speak with him for years. So I'm so grateful for the time that I had with him, because I didn't know he'd be taken from me during COVID, but I'm grateful for the time that Yah gave me with him, because in those years we did our Torah portions, and we would go through them, and we learned so much. And it felt like my faith grew by leaps and bounds. It just really did. So if I can encourage you guys to do the Torah portions, I almost challenge you. In fact, I do challenge you. You start with the Torah portion, and it doesn't matter where you start, because you can start at any point, and next year at this time, you will have gone through the Torah in 1 year. You do that consistently. Glean from the Torah, and I guarantee you your faith will change. I guarantee it, because Yah's word will not come back to him void, and he tells us to meditate upon his word. You take this to heart, and you'll be transformed. You will not recognize yourself a year from now. Keep doing them, and Yah will bless you. I mean, he literally tells us that. Take him at his word. I promise you, you'll grow. And so, come into this portion. It's called Mishpatim, or judgments. And it's interesting that this part comes right after the giving of the Ten Commandments. So it's important that we understand what's going on. So the Ten Commandments is the law of God. The Torah literally means instructions. So now you're going to get the instructions on how to obey the 10. And that's why Yeshua says things like, all the commandments hang on these two things. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. You can break down any of the commandments, and that's what he's teaching you. He's either teaching you how to love him with all your heart, mind, soul, or strength, or he's teaching you how to love your neighbor. That's the Torah instructions. And it's interesting today, in almost any place you go to, professing believers all think that the law's been done away with. We don't need it anymore. We're just under this grace. And they use this grace almost as a license to sin, because it's the Torah that tells you what sin is. So if you want to not walk in sin anymore, you have to learn the words of the Torah. How else will you know what sin is? And this is why, if we ever wonder, we see all these pastors and they're cheating on their spouses, and now we have gay pastors in the church. The reason why is because you've thrown out the very instructions that Yah wants you to keep. The things that will keep you from sin, you've now allowed into the church. And that was never the purpose of the law. The purpose of the law was to set us apart, so that we were witnesses to those who weren't following the one true God. They didn't know him. They were serving other gods. But Torah sets you apart, because people are going to say, he walks different. He does things different. We're all doing these things. We're keeping these holidays, but he doesn't. You'll be set apart when you're keeping the Torah. You don't keep them for your righteousness, because it's not our righteousness. The Bible literally says it's his righteousness. They're his righteous commandments. We can't boast that we keep the law, because it's not us doing it. It's him inside of us. If you've invited Messiah into your heart, he teaches you how to walk in obedience. And it's a growing process. Salvation is a process. A few weeks ago, we did a study on Paul. And I had said paradigms. We all have them. Paradigms and biases. Does anyone remember that? Paradigms are things you do on a habit-forming thing. Like, I guarantee most men, when you go to shave, you start on one side of your face and you do it religiously, because it's a paradigm. And that paradigm is tough to break. Start shaving on the other side of your face. It feels awkward. Paradigms are very difficult to break, and so are biases. If you come into this thinking, the law's been done away with, we're just under grace, you're going to read things into the text that aren't there. And that happens on a daily basis. This is what Seminaries are all teaching. For centuries now, they've all been taught that Paul is teaching that the law has been done away with. We're just under grace. So they have this bias, and they read it right into the text. And it's very sad to see that we today are nothing like the first century believers. We are so different from them today. If they were to walk in that front door, they wouldn't recognize a normal church. They just would not recognize it. They would be like, "What are you guys doing? This is not what our Messiah taught us." We've got to get out of that mindset that we think, "Oh, how could we be wrong for 2,000 years?" I hate to break the news to you, but we've been wrong for 2,000 years because we got off track. And we weren't the only ones. Our Jewish brethren did the same thing. By the time Yeshua comes onto the scene, they're not keeping Torah anymore. They're doing their own things. They've added to the law. But if you just keep it by the plain words, you will be changed. You will be transformed. And so it's interesting when you come to this part, it's called judgments. And if you read through these, how many of you did the Torah portion this week? Show of hands? Great. Did you read a law and think, "Oh my goodness, God's a tyrant. He wants me to keep that"? How many of you did that? Not any of us, right? Because when you're reading them, they're common sense. All of these commandments that we're reading in here, they just make sense. I mean, there's nothing in here that I ever read and I thought, "Man, God expects me to do that?" We don't ever see that. And so we see that many of them are just, I mean, think of some of these, and I'm just going to read a couple of them just to talk about it. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, and the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. And I'm sorry, I'm reading in Exodus 21, and I'm in verse 28. If an ox gores, I'll read it again. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, and the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. Listen to this. But if the ox tended to thrust with its horns in times past, and it has been made known to the owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and the owner shall be put to death. Why? Because he knew what this ox was doing. Now, doesn't that make sense? If you didn't know, well, then, of course, you're not going to blame the owner. He didn't know, and it got out, and then it killed a man. But also, I love the way Torah is so fair. So if it does kill a man, and say it was my brother, but I don't want the man to be put to death, well, then I could read verse 30. If there was imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay that to redeem the life. Because I don't think, okay, he doesn't deserve death, but I think he should pay a fine. Torah makes sense. Torah just makes sense. There's nothing in here that doesn't make sense, in my opinion. And I'm sure that all of you came to the same conclusion when you're reading through these. They just make sense. There's nothing in here that I read that I think to myself, man, this doesn't make any sense. And if you just read through them carefully, because sometimes they do seem a little confusing, but if you just read through them carefully, it kind of explains itself. And you'll see that with many of the commandments. And the rest of the Torah is the exact same way. It's just teaching us how to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and how to love our neighbor as ourselves. So when Yeshua said that, there's a reason why he said that. Because all the laws base on those two principles. They all hang on those two principles. And so most of these, when you're reading through these, especially 21 all the way up to I'd say about 23, because then we get into Sabbath laws. They all pertain with man. They all pertain with loving your neighbor as yourself, how to treat him fairly. Righteous laws, righteous judgments. It's interesting because I also saw a break. So when you start in chapter 21 and you go all the way through chapter 22 to verse 20, it starts to change. So in 20 through 22, chapter 22 through verse 20, all of it you'll notice are if statements. If this happens, then this happens. Well, do you think that here's another one I love. So most people say, when you say you keep the Torah, oh, do you stone people now? Well, I got news for you. The Israelites weren't going around throwing rocks at one another. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. So when it says that, being stoned, You had to go before a court of law. It was actually called the Bet Din, which means house of law. It was a court system. Remember, Moses had appointed rulers? Same thing. You weren't just able to start throwing rocks at one another. You had to go before a court system. And all these laws are man. Man is judging. He has to go before a court, and all of them, then a man gives the judgment. And this is what Moses was teaching the elders. This is when he assigned 50s and 10s and all that. This is what he was teaching them. Okay, this is what you do. Here's the laws, and this is what it says, and this is how you announce judgment. But it's interesting when you get to verse 21. Read chapter 22, verse 21. Because all of them man judges. But in 21, we get a switch. 21 says this, chapter 22, verse 21. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, and they cry at all out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And what will it be and it will be when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. Notice that here, God is doing the judging. But before that, you went before a court of law. It's interesting how the Torah breaks patterns. And anytime you see a break in the pattern, there's a reason for it. He's showing you now, okay, those were the laws for loving your neighbor. Now he's going to get into the laws of loving himself. And it's interesting that he tells you a little bit more about justice, and then he gets into the Sabbath, the laws of the Sabbath. Why? Because Sabbath is how we worship God. It's how we love him. And so when people say things like that Sabbath's been done away with, I don't think they realize what they're really saying. You're saying that God is saying not to worship him anymore? This is how I show God that I love him. This is how I show God that he's God. Because the other gods have chosen different days. But we are to be set apart. We're known for keeping Sabbaths. And that just doesn't include the weekly Sabbath. That includes his feasts. Because there was certain feasts that he said, this is a holy set-apart time. This is a holy convocation here. And he did that for Passover and the Day of Atonement. So we have other Sabbaths within his laws. These Sabbaths is how we worship our King. It's how we worship our King. This is how the world will know we're different. But if I'm doing the things that the world is doing, how will they know which God I'm serving? It will be confusing. It's not confusing when we begin to actually follow Torah, because it's the Torah that sets us apart as believers. This is why I think that the Torah is just wonderful to study. And like I said, I put the challenge out there. Do your Torah studies. Do them, and your faith will grow by leaps and bounds. Yah says that it'll happen. And his words will not come back to him void. And so the other thing I wanted to break that down to see how it was set apart, because then we get into, after he talks about his feasts, we get into the angel of the Lord. Now that's an interesting story there, because we know that this angel is not an ordinary angel. Because listen to this. So now we're in chapter 23, verse 20. Behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and bring you into the place that I have prepared for you. Beware of him and obey his voice. Do not provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgressions. For my name is in him. This is not an ordinary angel. This is the pre-incarnate Yeshua. Because anytime you've ever seen an angel in Scripture, and somebody bows to him, what does the angel tell him? Get up. Don't do that. I'm just an ordinary servant. But this angel accepts worship. We see that in a couple of occasions. We see that in the book of Joshua. Joshua bows to the angel, and the angel accepts worship. This is not an ordinary angel. And my name is in him. Because once you realize the Hebrew names of our Messiah, Yahushua and Yahuwah. Yahuwah is God the Father, and we can literally see his name in the Son's name. Our God is our Savior. And he is speaking only the things that the Father tells him to speak. He never speaks anything else. He only says what the Father tells him to speak. But indeed, I'm going to continue on. But if you indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then you will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your enemies. For my angel will go before you to bring you in to the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites. Now, I want to put that in modern day content. Think of this in modern day. So we don't go before the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Canaanites anymore, but we do go before the world. That's what this is representing. My angel will go before you, and he will bring you in. Do you see the shadow picture of your Messiah there? It's him doing the work in you. This isn't something we do on our own. We don't do it in our own strength. It's the angel of Yah, Yeshua, our Messiah. He rules and reigns in our hearts, and we do what he tells us to do. Why? Because he did it. He did it, why? As an example for us. He wasn't just keeping Torah to keep Torah. He was doing it to show us the way. This is how you walk. Do you want to represent the Father? You do it like this. And we see our Messiah keeping Sabbaths, keeping feasts, keeping the commandments the way they were supposed to be kept. Anytime he's going before the Pharisees, he's always telling them, you've heard it said, but I tell you. Why? Because they were adding things to the Torah. They made the Torah a burden. Instead of today, what we're being taught, that the Torah is just a burden. It's only a burden when you start adding things to it, because that's never was God's intention. Leave it just the way it is. And then you will begin to follow the ways of Yah. The minute I start to add to it, now I'm adding my own righteousness to it. I'm doing things that Yah has never said to do. He said, keep my words the way they are. Do not add to or take away from. So we need to keep the words the way they are. So it's interesting, we get these judgments, and then we get a picture of Yeshua, and then we get the covenant. In chapter 24, this is a very important chapter to understand. So I'm going to read through that, and then I want to relate this to the bondservants, because they're related. And I'm hoping to show that to you in a way maybe you've never seen it before. Chapter 24, starting in verse 1. Now he said to Moses, come up to Yahuwah, you, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and worship from afar. And Moses alone shall come near Yahuwah, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people go up with him. So Moses came and told the people all the words of Yahuwah and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice, all the words which Yahuwah had said, we will do. This is important to understand, because they've heard the words now, and they said everything that he says, we will do. So now we're entering into this covenant. And Moses wrote all the words of Yahuwah, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and the 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrifices, peace offerings of oxen to Yahuwah. Interesting passage right there, because these young men are the firstborn. The priesthood was originally firstborns, not Levites. We got the Levitical priesthood at the sin of the golden calf, because at the sin of the golden calf, Moses said, who's going to come near to me? And the Levites came. So that's when they took the place of the firstborn, but originally it was firstborn. It tells us that in Exodus chapter 13. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings of oxen to Yahuwah. What they're offering here is peace offerings, yes, but the burnt offerings, does anybody know what that is? It's called the Olah offering. It's a whole burnt offering. You burnt the whole animal, every bit of it, straight to Yahuwah. That represents a few things. That represents us. We are to bring ourselves as living sacrifices, are we not? The Olah offering represents us. It also represents Yeshua. We're going to get into some of that. I'll explain a little more here in a bit. So let's get back to this. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins and half the blood and sprinkled it on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said again, they're confirming the covenant, all that Yahuwah has said, we will do and be obedient. This is the important part. And Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant, which Yahuwah has made with you according to all these words. So now they've heard of the word of the covenant, and and he sprinkles the blood. Why is Moses sprinkling the people with blood? It's the covenant, but that's representing something. If you break this covenant, blood is owed. We owe blood. And we see that in Romans chapter 6, verse 23. Sin is death. Sin is death. And so if you're breaking the covenant, your blood is owed. Your blood is owed. And so this is a problem right here. Because how many of us have broken the covenant? Exactly. This is a problem here. This is the problem that Yeshua fixes. Because our blood was owed. But he took the place. Because he was righteous. He never broke the words of the covenant. So only a person who's never broken the words of the covenant has the right to redeem us. This is why the blood is so important. And this gives you your understanding of why we need a Messiah. Because I couldn't do it. If it was up to me, I'd be a dead man. Because I've broken the covenant. And my blood is owed. This is our forefathers right here. Everything that Yah said, we will do. But we can't do it. Not in this flesh. Not in our own strength. This is why the angel of the Lord is right there before. He's prefacing the angel of the Lord so you get it. You get it. You ain't going to be able to do this on your own. But my angel will work the work in you. He will give you the strength. He will give you the guidance. You can't do it without the angel. We need Yeshua. We are all without him, we're dead. We're dead. Our blood is literally owed. We took on the covenant. And this is why it's so important to be baptized. We stress on that, don't we, in this place? Because in baptism, that death that I owed right there is paid for. And now the law has no place to condemn me. Because the death that was owed has been paid for. I died in the likeness of sinful flesh when I'm buried in that ground and I come up a new man. And now I'm raised without spot, blemish, and wrinkle. And now I can learn to walk in the covenant. That's what grace is for. Grace is given for those of us who want to start to walk in obedience. We were once in disobedience. And then you accept Messiah. Now you're to walk. That's true repentance. That's biblical repentance. Repentance means I'm going this way, stop, do a 180, turn around, go back the other way. Disobedience was that way. I need to go back to obedience. And this is the good news. This is the good news because Yah fixes the problem. The problem is we all owe the death penalty. And we couldn't fix it on our own. We needed a Savior. And he provides the Savior. His law was never the problem. But in today, most professing believers, the law has been done away with. We don't need that. We're under grace. What are they saying? The law is the problem. The law is not the problem. Sin is the problem. Our fallen natures is the problem. Don't make his law the problem. And this is what I was talking about last week. A paradigm shift is needed. It's needed. If we can begin to teach professing believers the truth, maybe lives will begin to change. And they'll stop saying things, well, we're all sinners. We can't help ourselves. We're just some sinner. And so they stay stuck in sin when he wants you to overcome sin. He wants all of us to overcome sin. And you can only do that through Messiah. It's impossible to do it in your own strength. Don't even try. Don't even try. It's a effort and futility. And so that portion in 24 is so important. You must understand the blood covenant because we all entered into the blood covenant. Whether you know it or not, you're entered into the blood covenant. And so I wanted to also compare this covenant because this is important because what was offered there was an Ola offering, a full burnt offering. So I want to cover an Ola offering just a little bit. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 1. You know, we tend to think of the offerings as sacrifices. We always give it that term. It's sacrifices. Oh, we had to have an animal sacrifice. It's really not what the offerings were all about. So the word offering is korban, and it means coming near or drawing near. You made an offering. Big difference from sacrifice, isn't it? It's an offering. This is how we draw near to Yah. The only way you draw near to Yah is you have to offer yourself. That's why he starts with the burnt offering. Listen to this. Now Yahuwah called Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any one of you brings an offering to Yahuwah, you shall bring your offering to the livestock. You shall bring your offering of the livestock of your herd and of the flock. It is a burnt sacrifice of the herd. Let him offer a male without blemish, and he shall offer it of his own free will." This is a free will offering. Does God want us to come forcefully or a free will? Free will. This is a free will offering at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before Yahuwah, and he shall put his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. This burnt offering represents you. We are to represent ourselves, holy to Yah. To show you that, the whole offering was a symbolic act of demonstrating that the worshiper had offered himself in service and obedience to the commandments of Yah. We are to offer ourselves in service and obedience to Yah. Romans 12 verse 1 says this. Paul says, "I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of Elohim, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service." It's our reasonable service. We should want to do this. He is our king, and I broke his commandments. It's our reasonable service. Verse 2 says this, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable, perfect will of Elohim." By doing this, we show that God's will is perfect. It's acceptable. God's will. God's will is that we walk in obedience, not disobedience. It's his will for us. Isn't that what Ecclesiastes says? It's the whole duty of man, to serve Yah. It's like going to your boss and saying, "Hey, I did what you told me to do," and expect credit for it. What's your boss going to tell you? "Well, that's good. That's what I pay you for." This is our good and acceptable service. It's what Yah expects of us. He wants us to keep his commandments. And so it should be on our heart to want to please our master. He's our king, isn't he? He's our king. We should want to obey him. I also wanted to compare this story right here. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on, because he goes more into the burnt offerings. You could offer different animals, but I wanted to show you how it's a free will offering, and the entire animal had to be burnt up. It represents you. It's a free will offering of you. You're saying, "Yah, I'm offering myself as a living sacrifice. I want to do things your way." And this is how we drew near to Yah. They weren't just killing animals for no reason. There was a reason why they were done. And we think that, man, God wanted all these offerings, man. These sacrifices, they're always called sacrifices. And it's really not what the Bible actually says. It's called offerings. How we draw near. So let's go back to the story. I want to get into verse 9, and I want to read some of that. And I want to compare it to the Akedah binding of Isaac. So let's go back to Genesis before we get here. Let's go back to Genesis. And we're going to go to chapter 22. And we're going to read from 2 on down. Genesis chapter 22, starting in verse 2. Now we know the story. This is where Abraham's told to offer up Isaac. And we know the story. We all know what they represent, right? Abraham represents the father. Isaac represents the son, correct? So this is a shadow picture here. It's more than just the story. So he says this in verse 2. "And then he said, Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I shall tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, and he saddled his donkey, and he took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which Yah had told him. And on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go up yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." So Abraham took the wood of the offering and laid it on Isaac, his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the two of them went up together. But Isaac said to Abraham, his father, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And then he said, "Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "My son, Elohim will provide himself the lamb for the burnt offering." And so the two of them went together, and they came to the place of which Yah had told him. And Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. Then he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord, probably the very same angel that we just read about, called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am. Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear Elohim, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And then Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and there behind him was the ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went up and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering. This again is an olah offering. Abraham was offering Isaac as a burnt offering, a whole burnt offering, an olah offering. Abraham called the name of the place, "Yahuwah will provide, as it is said to you this day in the mount of Yahuwah, it shall be provided." So I want to read that story, and I want us to go back and read this story in Exodus 24 and make some comparisons, because it's interesting. That story actually ties into this. So back to Exodus chapter 24, verse 9. Then Moses went up, and also Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. And they saw the Elohim of Israel, and there under his feet, as it were paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. But on the nobles of the children of Israel he did not lay his hand. So they saw Elohim, and they ate and they drank. And then Yahuwah said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain, and there I will give you the tablets of stone and the law and the commandment which I have written, that you may teach them." So Moses arose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of Elohim, and he said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we get back to you. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you, and if any man has difficulty, let him go up to them." And Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. Now the glory of Yahuwah rested on Mount Sinai, and a cloud covered it in 6 days. And on the 7th day he called out to Moses in the midst of the cloud. The sight of the glory of Yahuwah was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. So Moses went up into the midst of the cloud and went into the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now we're going to compare that story with the story that we just read in Genesis. Check out these comparisons. Genesis 22, verse 5 says, "Abraham said to the young men, 'Stay here with the donkey, and the lad and I will go up yonder and worship, and we will come back to you.'" That was in Genesis 22:5. Now read Exodus 24:14. And you don't have to go back and forth. I'll just read them out loud so you kind of hear it. Exodus 24:14 says, Moses said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come back to you." It's almost the very same thing that Abraham said. Wait here. In both instances, there's a group of people told to wait at the bottom of the mountain. Now check out this comparison. And again, don't be fooled. I'll read them and you can listen. Genesis 22, verse 9. Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. Exodus 24:4. And Moses, rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. Both of them are building altars. These stories are compared because he's trying to get you to show you what an olah offering is. Olah offering in the first story, olah offering in the second story. An altar is built in both stories for an olah offering. When did the preparations for each event occur? Well, Moses went early in the morning, and Abraham went early in the morning. It tells us the same thing. Last comparison, Genesis 22:12 says this, "And he said, 'Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know you fear Yah, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me.'" Exodus 24:11 says the same thing. The elders are there, and it says this, "But the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand. So they saw God, and they ate and they drank." He's trying to get you to connect the olah offerings in the first story to the olah offerings in the second story. And we read what an olah offering is. It's a symbolic act of the worshiper. They had entered into this covenant with Yah, a blood covenant. So the youths were the firstborn, acting as priests on the behalf of the entire nation. They offered olah offerings as a testimony that this nation was to be set apart. It was to be a holy nation. Why? To show the world who the one true living God was. They were to walk in covenant to be a light to the nations. That's our purpose. This is why we keep covenant. This is why we keep the Sabbath. And we do the things in the Torah that the Torah tells us to do. These aren't Jewish things. He gave it to the nation of Israel. And because we relate Jews and Israel together, we automatically think that, oh, Passover, that's for the Jews. But that's not what the Bible teaches. These are God's ways. He literally says that in Leviticus 23. He says, these are my feasts. He doesn't say, these are the feasts for you Jews. He doesn't say that. This is how we're set apart. He's wanting us to be set apart, not just because, so we can be a witness to the world, so that the world will see who the one true living God is. This is how he shows himself to a dying world. When we're walking in covenant, we represent the king. That was our purpose. Weren't we supposed to be a peculiar, set-apart people? Yeah, we're going to be peculiar because we're doing things that the world says, that's not normal. We don't do it like that no more. They want to worship God in their own way, not in the way that he commanded them to worship him. When we do it his way, we represent him. But when we're doing it our own way, then we're representing a God of our own imagination. We're not representing the king anymore. This is important. These things need to be shared with the world. So getting back to the olah offering, and I want to tie it together with the bondservant because they are together. These stories are linked. Connections of the bondservant and the olah offering. What is the main duty of the bondservant? Serve his master. Obey his master. And it's interesting the time period. He lived with him for 6 years, and on the 7th year he was set free. What do we know of the story of the creation? 6 days Yah made the heavens and the earth. That's man. And the 7th day is the Sabbath, representing eternity with him. The millennial reign. Bondservant, same thing. Same thing. The bondservant was to obey his master. And it was interesting because in the bondservant story, we have this part where he says, but if the servant loves his master, and he says, I love my master, I don't want to go away from you. He was to put his ear on the doorpost and have an awl drilled through his ear. Now that's some interesting stuff right there, because what's on the doorpost of a Jewish home? The commandments, right? The mezuzahs. Deuteronomy 6 tells us this. Deuteronomy 6. It is Deuteronomy 6, verse 6. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. First and foremost, be on our hearts. First and foremost. God wants us to obey. Why? Because we love him. We serve him because we love him. He wants us to obey because we love him. So they're to be on our heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down. And when you rise up, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them where? On the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So on the doorpost of the master, you were to place your ear. That represents us and our relationship to our king. We place our ear on the doorpost of his throne room. He opens up our ear with an awl. That means now we're going to hear. He's opened up our ears. So we hear what he's commanded. The bondservant and the olah offering are together. And I'm going to show you that. In Psalms 40, let's go there. Starting in verse 6. It says this, sacrifices and offerings you did not desire. My ears you have opened. He's opening up his ears. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, behold, I come in the scroll of the book. It is written of me. And who does that represent? Yeshua. Yeshua is the ultimate bondservant. He only came to do what the Father told him to do. He's a bondservant. He's listening to the commands of his Father. And then it says this, and and then it says this, and then I said, behold, I come, in the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my Elohim, your law is written on my heart. The law was written on the Son's heart, and it should be written on our hearts. He is our Messiah. We follow after our Messiah. He was a bondservant, and he was an Olah offering. The two go together. The psalmist and the bondservant had their ears open to the commandments of Yah. Yeshua takes on the role of the bondservant and the Olah offering. Philippians 2, verse 5. Philippians 2, starting in verse 5. If you want to go there. If not, I'll just read it. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yeshua, who, being in the form of Elohim, did not consider it robbery to be equal with Elohim. But he made himself of no reputation, taking on the form of what? A bondservant. And coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. That's what we should do. We should humble ourselves, and then we walk in obedience. Now, I often wondered why. Why did the Septuagint? How many people know what the Septuagint is? Septuagint is the Greek translation of your Old Testament. So when they came out of Babylonian captivity, many of them lost the Hebrew language. And they were speaking Greek. Greek was like the biggest language of the day. And so they learned Greek. And so there was 70 elders, I guess. That's where the word Septuagint comes from. It's 70. Translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek so that the people could read it. And sometimes they translated things a little different. So you'll notice in your New Testament, every time it's quoting the Old Testament, it's almost always the Septuagint, not the Masoretic. We got the Masoretic from Jews centuries after Messiah. Centuries. And so they translated things a little different. The Septuagint says, sacrifices and offerings you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. Completely different than my ears you have opened, but the two go together. They're not separate from one another. I used to think, wow, that's totally different translations. That's weird. Same thing. Because the bondservant has his ears open to obey, and the Olah offering, this is how the two are tied together. You represent yourself as an Olah offering, a complete burnt offering, a body you have prepared for me. It's representing our King, or Yeshua. He had a body prepared for him so that he can sacrifice himself as the Olah offering on our behalf. See how the bondservant and the Olah offering go together? And now I see how the Septuagint translated it different. I used to think they were completely separate, but they actually go together. Because it's a body that we give to him. Our entire body. We're supposed to present ourselves as living sacrifices, and then we obey. So he not only opens up our ears, but we offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. They go together. And that's what I got out of the Torah portion. I hope this has blessed you.